Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. We're watching OBN Horn of Africa. I am Necsa, your host and producer. Today, we're going to discuss about nuclear energy. Obviously, nuclear energy is a controversial subject. The pro and anti-nuclear lobbyists fight furiously, and it's difficult to decide who is right. So we are trying to clear up this issue. I joined by Dr. Kelvin Kemm from South Africa, Pretoria, to discuss on this very controversial and debatable issue. Dr. Kelvin Kemm, good to join me today.
Thank you, Mr. Asifa. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Let me begin with what does nuclear physics deals about?
Well, what you find is that when you have conventional chemical energy, which is like taking charcoal or wood and burning it, what you have is oxygen combines with carbon in the wood or the charcoal. And then you get some energy off as that chemical reaction takes place. The chemical reaction does not give off very much heat in terms of physics. If you go deeper into the atom, right into the nucleus of the atom, there's a huge amount of energy in there. There's millions and millions and millions of times more energy in the nucleus. If you can take the nucleus of an atom like uranium and split it into two halves, it gives off a massive amount of energy. So much that if you take something like a soft drink can of uranium, 2 soft drink cans of uranium will supply enough electricity for the entire lifetime of one human being from birth till death. Now that you can't get out of coal or wood. So the energy in nuclear is phenomenal. And this is why it is the energy of the future. It is something that I believe in 100, 200 years' time, teachers will sit in schools and look back and say, way back in the year 2000 and like this, mankind, some people could see the future and some couldn't. It's like if you go back to the earlier 1800s, you see pictures of London where you've got horse-drawn carts and motor cars going down the road at the same time. There were people then that thought motor cars were just a funny curiosity that people did for fun, but that the real transport was done only with horses. The First World War started off with both armies using mainly horse-drawn transport. You cannot imagine a modern war being fought now where instead of tanks and artillery on the battlefield drawn by motor vehicles, they're going into battle on horses. So that's where we are now with nuclear energy, that a lot of people have realized that nuclear is the future. And what we in Africa have to do is that we have got to find African solutions decided by Africans for Africa. We are not Europe. We can have a look at what Europe's done, and we can say maybe we can learn some things from what they've done, but we mustn't slavishly follow their solutions. We must think up our own answers.
Okay, there is this claim. Some people are against this energy technology, and others are for it, and against and for this argument. You know what I mean? And what is your side? Are you pro or anti-nuclear energy?
I'm very much in favor of nuclear energy, and I'm glad you asked that question, because where that came from was that the first demonstration of nuclear energy to mankind was the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which ended the Second World War in Japan and the Far East. The scientists had realized a few years earlier that the energy in the nucleus was fantastic. Famously, Albert Einstein wrote to the American president at the time, Roosevelt, and said, we think we can maybe make an explosive out of this, but we're not sure. So they put money into this, and they succeeded in making a nuclear bomb. That was because of the wartime pressure. So the public knew nothing about the power of nuclear energy until the day that that bomb dropped on Hiroshima and one entire city disappeared in a few moments. So can you imagine the public relations of that? The first introduction was this destruction. They also didn't then realize that nuclear radiation could be damaging. So it was only afterwards that it was realized that nuclear radiation can have certain harmful effects. And an entirely wrong impression was then created that all nuclear is like that. And I must emphasize, a nuclear reactor cannot explode like a bomb. It's impossible. The way in which the uranium is put together is completely different. So there's no chance of a nuclear reactor going bang. And in the earlier days of nuclear reactors, the anti-lobby would say, you can't have a reactor. What happens if it explodes and blows up the city? That cannot happen. There's also been worry about catastrophic accidents, which history has shown does not happen either. So the basic problem now is that the public perception worldwide has largely been very incorrect. And that's why there's been this fear of the unknown. But nuclear energy is very safe, very reliable, very green, and the most inexpensive electricity of all when it's handled professionally by professional people.
Okay, I have tried to go through journals and articles, come up with your notion and idea about nuclear energy. And you've said once, Africans' future depends on nuclear power.
Yes.
Remember this notion?
Yes.
What does it mean by, and why you had such stand?
Well, you know, the standard map projection that we use in all schools gives a rather inaccurate impression of what the world looks like, the size of Africa. Africa is huge. And Africa is bigger than the whole of the United States, China, Europe, and India added together. People do not realize the size of it. Ethiopia is a large country of something like 1 million square kilometers. European countries are minute in comparison. So the challenges we've got of moving electricity very long distances is completely different to the type of challenge faced in Europe. My impression is that Ethiopia does quite well in this respect, but you people have a population of something like 116 million, I believe, which is a substantial population, far bigger than France, Germany, England, any of those countries like that. So we have to look, what is the challenge for us? Trying to go for hydro, for example, is not a good idea because African hydro is completely different to European hydro as well. If you look at countries like Norway and Sweden, their hydro tends to be in very vertical, like this, gaps between their mountains, which has got a guaranteed runoff of water. So the pressure height and the amount of water is guaranteed. In Africa, our dams look like this. They're like big saucers with huge loss during drought. So you can lose 3/4 of the water out of a big dam. That means that your electricity output from hydro in Africa depends on whether it rains. How can you run an aircraft factory or run a modern economy on the basis that it rains or it doesn't? So we have those challenges, so we're not the same. These distances, the dust in Africa, the variability of the rain and so on, all means that we've got to look at ourselves and come up with solutions for ourselves. And nuclear, you can put wherever you like. Now, I must emphasize, there are large nuclear power stations of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 megawatts, which is big. But then there's a whole new class of nuclear reactor now called the small modular reactor. And they are like 100 megawatts, 200, 300 megawatts, that type of size. And within the modular reactors also, there's two divisions. There's one that uses water, which is the older type, less sophisticated, and the more modern type, which uses gas. And the big thing about that is you don't need to be near any water source. So for Africa, you can take a small modular reactor that's gas cooled and put it anywhere you like. It doesn't have to be near a dam. It doesn't have to be near the sea. It doesn't have to be near the coal supply or anything like that. So if you've got an industrial area like a mining area or something and you want electricity there, you just go right there and build a power station there. And these factors make a huge difference in one's concepts when planning.
You are CEO of Nuclear Africa, right?
Yes.
What do you do there? And can you tell us about your organization?
Well, what we have been doing is looking towards progressing nuclear technology generally. And that is nuclear power to produce electricity, but it's also other things like in South Africa, for example, we produce nuclear medicine. And nuclear medicine is by far the best way to detect cancer. South Africa is the second biggest producer of nuclear medicine in the world, supplying over 60 countries, and there are 2 or 3 exports that take place every single day of the year continuously around the world supplying nuclear medicine. It's injected into a person, it goes into your bloodstream, and it finds the cancers. It's incredibly accurate. So we're in an advanced state. I would like to see nuclear medicine centers coming about all over Africa in a big network linked into a South African system where we all mutually collaborate. You can also use nuclear energy in agriculture. You can use nuclear in tracking winds, for example, sea currents, and all sorts of things like that. So there's a lot of application in nuclear. Only one aspect of it is actually the production of electricity. And what's so important about that with nuclear is that it's very reliable and it just runs 24 hours a day without any trouble. Unlike the wind and solar solutions that have been proposed, that you do not get any solar at night and you don't get any wind when the wind doesn't blow. So, trying to run an electric train, for example, on wind or solar is impossible because the risk is too great. You never know whether you're there or not. You need a modern economy. For that, you need good sense, you need intelligence, you need some sophistication. Now, what springs to mind with me is you look at something like Ethiopian Airlines. Now, Ethiopian Airlines has a reputation for being an excellent airline, equal to the world's best. You have superb pilots and a superb Ethiopian airline system. That's because people who know what they're doing are running the operation. You've got competent people doing a good job. It's the same with nuclear power. There's nothing to stop any African country going into nuclear power immediately. You need competent people with brains who know what they're doing and they obey the rules. If you can run an airline as efficiently as Ethiopia does, you can run small modular nuclear reactors perfectly as well. Images that somehow nuclear is only for the big sophisticated Western world is not true. A small modular reactor of 100, 200 megawatts can be placed anywhere in Ethiopia and Ethiopians can run it. There's no problem. So that's another thing that the advanced first world tends to know. You're only Africans, you only come from Africa, you guys must burn blocks of wood or something. Don't try and play with the big boys. That's not the case at all. You can go nuclear.
This nuclear energy is a very big concept and it has so many things in it. And let's talk about nuclear weaponries and nuclear weapons, right? Do you have such trend, or do you have a trend of developing nuclear weapon in Africa or where you are working now?
Okay, well, nuclear weapons is a completely different ballpark. Now, in fact, South Africa did develop nuclear weapons and manufactured nuclear weapons years ago now, decades ago. Then it was decided that that was not a pathway to the future, and South Africa became the first country in the world to declare it had nuclear weapons and the first country in the world to then dismantle the nuclear weapons and do away with them. And we became a landmark country for that. Now,
nuclear physics deals with nuclear weapons as well, and I need you to substantiate and highlight as the way how nuclear weapons got produced and what are you really doing in that area and what Africans should do, because these world superpowers these days are working on it vigorously. It's a kind of competition. It's a kind of a class category based on this nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. Those who got nuclear weapons are becoming leading global powers in terms of military and other stuff. We can mention this United States, France, India, Pakistan, Russia. These countries are the leading countries in nuclear weapon. And Africa, I haven't seen any country in the top list while I just check and go through for while Googling out names of those countries who are just developing nuclear weapon. And it's very vital for Africa because it works that way, because when other countries are working on it, Africa shouldn't sleep, you see, should work on it to fight, to resist the global computation one way or another. And can you substantiate all this together?
Yes. Now, what happened is that Africa as a region declared itself to be a nuclear weapons-free zone before the rest of the world did. This was quite a few years ago already. So Africa as a region was ahead of the rest of the world in saying nuclear weapons is not going to get you anywhere, because it was realized many years ago already that if one country fires nuclear weapons at another, they're going to shoot back. So no matter which way you look at it, nuclear weapons are going to land on both countries. And so both countries are going to suffer massive destruction. So people realize that pursuing a nuclear weapons future is not going to get anywhere. Now, the Americans and the Russians have agreed some time ago, some talks called SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, SALT, to reduce. But of course, the countries are afraid of each other. So they agreed we reduce a certain amount, and they both reduced a certain amount, and then a little bit more, and so on. So the idea now is for everybody to reduce the nuclear weapons until there aren't any. Now, I must tell you that the biggest technological difficulty in producing nuclear weapons is what's called uranium enrichment. When uranium comes out of the ground, it comes out at 99.3% of one type of uranium that you don't want for weapons. It's only 0.7% is the bit that's usable for weapons. And the enrichment is how to increase that 0.7 up. Now, in the case of a normal nuclear reactor, conventional water-cooled reactor, you enrich it up to about 5%, and it works fine in a nuclear reactor. These modern small modular reactors, the one designed now in South Africa, there's one designed here, which I think is the answer for Africa, called the HTMR 100. It uses an enrichment of 10%, but a bomb needs an enrichment of 90%. And it's hugely difficult to get from 10% enrichment to 90%. So the world community a few years ago declared a barrier of 20%. They said anybody working with enrichments under 20% is considered safe, and that is in the power electricity generating area. Soon as any country crosses the 20% barrier, they will be deemed to have been working towards bad things such as bombs. At the time, a reactor in South Africa called the Safari reactor near Pretoria at Necsa was running at over 90% enriched uranium. We then decided to bring it down below the 20% mark. To be honest, we rushed to try and not be left behind by the world. We brought it down to just under 20%, and everybody patted themselves on the back and said, we've got under 20%. Then to my amazement, I discovered that South Africa was the first country in the world to achieve this. And I was in London when the American Department of Energy gave us an award for this achievement, and I was able to announce this award in London at the World Nuclear Association. So we rushed to not be left behind and ended up being the world first. So as long as countries stay under that 20% mark, it's in the safe zone, and then you can use it for nuclear power. If you go beyond 20, there's no need to do that unless you've got basically evil intention. So Africa should continue to show the rest of the world we don't need to get above the 20% mark to energize the country through electricity.
Can you highlight us nuclear waste storage impact on the environment?
All right. Now, that's also a very major factor to bear in mind, because it's also maybe misunderstood. In fact, I wrote an article only this past week that was published in a South African energy magazine called ESI Africa. And if people get hold of that by looking for it on Google, they can read up all the details. As I said to you earlier on, a couple of soft drink cans of uranium will supply the energy for the lifetime of one human. Now, what's interesting with nuclear is if you were to take, say, a soft drink can size of uranium and put it in a nuclear reactor, when it's been used up, we call it spent fuel. When it comes out of the nuclear reactor, it looks exactly the same. You can't tell the difference. There's no gas produced, there's no ash produced, unlike burning coal in a coal-fired power station where you've got ash and all sorts of gases like sulfur gases and nitrous gases coming out of the power station. There's nothing that comes out of nuclear. So you put a soft drink can of uranium in, sometime later you take a soft drink can of out, and it's exactly the same. When that comes out, that is the high level nuclear waste. The difference is that some of the uranium atoms have been split into other things. Before you put the uranium into the nuclear reactor, you could in fact hold it in your hand. They don't allow you to do that. It's against the rules of good conduct. But in fact, you could walk around with that lump of uranium in your hand before you put it into the nuclear reactor. When it comes out of the nuclear reactor, if you came anywhere near that piece of uranium, it would kill you in a few moments. You wouldn't be able to get out the room alive. Then it's deadly. And just like I said with your efficiency in running Ethiopian Airlines, if you're running a nuclear reactor, you have competent people that don't walk into a room where a piece of this used uranium is standing and try and pick it up or something silly like that. Now, the anti-nuclear lobby say, oh, this waste is so bad, it's going to be radioactive for thousands of years and things like this, which is true. But you just look after it. You go and take it, you put it in concrete containment, you put it underground, you dig down a couple of 100 meters or something like that, and you look after it. Now, I must emphasize, there's so little of it. And there's a nuclear power station near Cape Town in South Africa. It's the only nuclear power station in Africa, and it's the most southerly nuclear power station in the world, called Koeberg. It's 2,000 megawatts in size. If Koeberg was a coal-fired power station, it would use 6 train loads of coal every day. But in fact, it's a nuclear power station that only uses 1 truckload of uranium every year. That's all. All the nuclear waste that has ever been produced at Koeberg for 35 years now is still stored on site. Now, if it was coal, you couldn't store 35 years worth of ash on the property like that. So the huge advantage of nuclear waste is there's so little of it. And it's perfectly safe if you use your brains and you obey the rules. Like it's flying in an aeroplane is very safe if it's been properly maintained and you're a good pilot and you listen to the air traffic control instructions. If you have incompetent people, then you can kill yourself in an aeroplane. The same principle applies. So nuclear is nowhere near as scary and so on as the extreme anti-nuclear lobby project.
Your company produce nuclear medicine, right? What does that medicine cure, or what kinds of disease would be cured by such medicine?
Well, there's 2 different branches now with the nuclear medicine. One is the diagnostics, but nuclear medicine is still very new in world terms. Now they're moving from diagnostics over to the therapy part. They're in between those 2 now as far as they go. There's a world-leading nuclear medical doctor in Pretoria, Professor Mike Satechi, who's been a good friend of mine for many years. And he's somebody that is doing a lot of pioneering work in this field. And so because they're halfway between the 2, so to speak, it's called theranostics at the moment, between the therapy and the diagnostics. Now, if you've got a cancer, you put in the nuclear medicine is injected into your arm, and you wait in a couple of hours, and then you get put into a scanner, like a MRI scanner, and it'll pick out where the cancer is. And it's incredibly accurate. It's by far the most accurate way of detecting the cancer, and you can detect it by far the earliest. If you've got the tiniest little bit of cancer starting and you use nuclear medicine, you'll find it immediately. By conventional methods, it'll take you maybe weeks, before months, maybe before the cancer shows up. And clearly, the earlier you catch it, the more chance you've got of taking corrective action with the conventional methods. But now there's this theranostics that comes about as well, whereas what they do is they inject you with a different radioactive material, and it will go to the cancer site. So I'm not a medical person, I'm not a cancer specialist, but say you've got cancer of one of the organs in the body. You inject the right sort of medicine that the chemicals will go there, and it carries the nuclear bit with it. It's like being a passenger on a bus. And when it arrives right at the cancer cell, the radiation is a very short-range radiation, and it kills the cancer cell right there. And there have been some spectacular successes in Professor Tsategi's laboratory here, where people that had been shown to have such bad cancer that they were given only months to live, after being treated with this 2 or 3 years later, now they're running around perfectly okay, and there's no sign that they ever had cancer ever. But this is not available easily to everybody at the moment because it's still cutting edge technology. There's other approaches too that get rid of melanoma, skin cancers. They can treat cancers in eyes and various interesting things, but we're still pushing that forward. But right now, the important one to get going over Africa on a larger scale is the diagnostic part. Now, a huge advantage of that as well is that you don't need a nuclear medical doctor where the patient is, because you can email the scan. So you can have a scanning facility reasonably cheaply out in the bush somewhere, and local people can go there, they can be scanned. You need a qualified nurse to do that work. You can then email the scan to Pretoria, Cape Town, or anywhere else in Africa or the world for that matter where there's a qualified doctor, and they will tell you the answer within a couple of hours, and then tell the local doctor or local medics what to do about it. Whereas, most medicine, the patient's got to go to where the doctor is, and there aren't enough highly qualified nuclear doctors to have them all over Africa. So this is an idea that's been looked at by a number of African countries. It's also usually financially very good for the state, because if you catch the cancer late, the patient turns up at the hospital by now.
Let me interrupt you here. You mean that your nuclear medicine cure this chronic cancer disease, or it just decrease its severity, or it only detect whether someone is suffering from cancer or not? So what does it mean by it? Is that a complete medicine which give a recovery or a relief from cancer totally, or it decrease the severity, or it detect whether someone has got cancer or not?
The important thing initially is to detect it very early. There have been some complete cures here in Pretoria, but these have been at the university hospital. You cannot just walk into any doctor now and get yourself cured, because we don't have enough of the curative facilities, but it's coming. But certainly what will help immensely is to get the diagnostics early on. If you get cancers like in men, prostate cancers, women, breast cancers, for example, often the reason why the patients die is that it's detected too late to do anything about it. Whereas if you detect it very early, then conventional methods can get in quickly and you can save the life. So in that sense, very early diagnostics will save people's lives. Whereas so often what happens is the patients further away from the big medical centers, by the time they arrive at the hospital, it is so far advanced that all the doctor can say is, I'm sorry, you got so many months to live, there's nothing we can do about it. But if it's found early on, if there's large-scale scanning, then, as I said, it will also be profitable for the country, because it's far cheaper to treat a patient early on and sort it out than to wait until they're in a hospital case, which then clogs up the medical system and becomes problematic. So this is why there's all of this. And my point was that these advanced nuclear technologies are available to every African country. It is not something that only the advanced first world has the benefit of using.
Dr. Kelvin, you have received Award of Excellence from Russia. And can you tell us about this achievement, and for what achievement would they granted you that award?
Well, I was previously the chairman of the Nuclear Energy Corporation in South Africa, known as Necsa. And Necsa is the second biggest producer of nuclear medicine in the world. It's quite spectacular what it's done. And there's exports that take place every single day. They make the nuclear medicine because it has a limited lifetime. The nuclear medicine is made, it's rushed to the airport. It goes on an airport, an aeroplane takes off and goes to Argentina or Turkey or the United States or the Far East or something like that. And in Necsa, they say they'll inject anybody in the world within 36 hours of the nuclear medicine coming out of the reactor. And that type of thing has been achieved, and exports take place to more than 60 countries. So the excellence is not only in the production of the nuclear medicine, but getting the nuclear medicine moved all over the world very rapidly. And Necsa has become very good at that. In Russia, I was there attending a big international conference of over 1,000 people present. There were 72 countries there, and they had an awards ceremony for certain achievements. And I was very proud to be called up on stage and to be given the award on behalf of Necsa for excellence in nuclear medicine production. So there I stood in front of 72 countries, 1,000 people, receiving this award on behalf of all the fine people at Necsa that produced the nuclear medicine. So that was great that we were recognized like that. And we have quite a significant collaboration with the Russians on a wide range of nuclear technologies, because they've got very good scientists and engineers in the business as well, and so does South Africa.
This nuclear energy is very debatable issue and a very debatable discipline. When it comes to this medicine and nuclear medicine and electricity and related with this resisting, combating carbon emission, all these are positive side of nuclear energy. When it comes to this nuclear weapon, still it has got its own drawbacks. For instance, we can mention what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Albert Einstein did that development or technology by default, and he was regretted with what was happening by then. You know what I'm saying? Still, the trauma is with Japanese people, and we are seeing so many autistics there, so many people with psycho makeup problems. You see, how do you comprehend this too? Can we say totally this nuclear energy and nuclear science, nuclear physics is about positive outcome? Can we say that genuinely, really?
Yes, I can. Now, as I said earlier, as with many things, take ordinary pharmaceuticals, for example. If you go and get some sleeping pills from the pharmacy because you want to get a good night's sleep, you take one pill and you'll sleep nicely. Take a whole box of pills and you're never going to wake up. So it's a case of obeying the rules and doing things properly. Now, nuclear technology is completely positive and safe as long as you don't do stupid things and abuse it. And this is why we need African countries to stand up and say we're going nuclear. Already about a dozen African countries have formally notified the International Atomic Energy Agency that they're going on a nuclear future. Now, as far as the big issue that you're effectively mentioning is the misunderstanding of the public, and that has been a very major factor. I mean, for example, there's a concept going around that says any amount of nuclear radiation is dangerous, no matter how small it is. That's not true. That has been shown to not be true. So the anti-nuclear lobby say, oh, if there's the tiniest little bit of radiation somewhere, then it's dangerous. You'll get it and it'll kill you, or it'll deform your child or something to that effect. That's not the case. Now, what we've had, for example, we had that, which is now the well-known Fukushima accident that took place in Japan. I've written articles on the Fukushima accident, and people say, oh, this big nuclear accident. I've written an article, more than one, to say it was not a nuclear accident. Do you know, not one single person was killed by nuclear radiation at that Fukushima incident. Not one single person was injured by nuclear radiation. No private property was damaged by nuclear radiation. Nothing. What did happen was the reactors melted, the inside, the core melted. There was huge financial damage. They were very old reactors anyway, and they wrecked. So it was a massive financial problem for the owners. It was very embarrassing for the Japanese government, but it wasn't a nuclear accident in the sense there was not this this devastation that many people have said would be the case. There have been so many false stories about all the radiation out of Fukushima. There isn't any. Years ago, I said, I'll happily go there and swim in the sea at Fukushima. The sea is not radioactive. I'll happily go and eat any of the fish they catch there. I'll happily go and eat any of the vegetables that were grown in the area. And at the time, people were too scared to eat the fish, eat the vegetables, go there, and so on. So nuclear energy, nuclear power has got an extremely good record as far as damage is concerned. There hasn't been deaths and so on. The one was one that happened, Chernobyl in Russia, where less than 60 people were killed after that. And that included firemen and soldiers and so on who were sent in to tackle the fire. And very brave individuals. And that happened. But there weren't thousands and thousands of deaths. There are far more deaths in hydro, for example. When a dam breaks, many people can get killed. So if you look at the death statistics for electricity, nuclear is by far the best. There are more people die in hydropower, wind power, and solar power than die in nuclear power. So there's been a huge public misperception. So what I would urge any African country to do is to start telling your population the truth and not be guided by extreme anti-nuclear propaganda that is so prevalent all over the place these days. I'm pleased to say, by the way, that South Africa is moving towards building more nuclear now as we speak. The Minister of Minerals and Energy, Mr. Gwedi Mantashe, has announced that he's intending to put in another 2,500 megawatts of nuclear, and there's requests out now for information, and they're busy having hearings that start in a few days' time for nuclear licenses. So we'll see what the minister decides. But very, very, very few ministers in the world have had the courage to stand up and say, we're following nuclear because we believe it's the right path. And I would urge all African countries to do it. You know, we found countries like Zambia, Uganda, Kenya, and a few others have stood up and said, we see nuclear. And I've had the chance to speak to a number of these African leaders, and they all, when they sit and give it a bit of thought, say, look, this is the answer. Why go some of the silly route that we've told by people that come from countries that are completely different to ours? Let us think for ourselves and make our own decisions.
Great. Okay, you were a keynote speaker on African Union Economic Summit. Can you recite us about it?
Yes, there was an African Economic Summit that was actually held in Mauritius, and I was honored by being invited to be guest speaker. And there were about 200 people present there from virtually all African Union countries. And during the course of that presentation, I said what I've been saying here, that small modular reactors, gas-cooled reactors that don't need to be anywhere near water, that is the answer. We can also interlink them in a way that we can pass information between each other via internet and so on. It's not difficult these days. And a number of the African countries then said to me, wow, that's what we're looking for. And that is where, in fact, a number of the countries who spoke to me afterwards said, do you realize how bad the hydro situation is in our countries? People think hydro is a very reliable source, but it isn't. I sat with the Tanzanian delegation. They showed me one power station had lost 73% of its output because it hadn't rained. So I said, look, it's terribly risky. And we had a number of discussions over the following few days, and people said, well, this is the way we have to go. So it's a case of us realizing that that is the future, getting together, having a collective African opinion on the matter, and not buckling under when we get jumped on by various other first world countries and so on who tell us toe the line and do as they say. The answer is no, we do what we want to do in the interests of our own.
Okay, you urged African nation to develop and to work on nuclear energy. And let me, trace a question from it. This world superpower are not willing, or they're not willing to see other nation to develop a nuclear weapon. Like, let's talk about the nuclear weapon segment from this nuclear energy. And for these imperialists or these corporate oligarchies are counting a nuclear weapon as a matter of existence. It's a matter of existence, and it's existential to them. In the meantime, they don't want to see other nations, especially developing nations, are not allowed to develop such huge projects, meaning huge nuclear weaponries. What do you advise African nations to work on this very vital development? Because it's, as I have said, it's a matter of sovereignty, it's a matter of existence. The world this day, the superpower are computing on this development. We can mention US, France, North Korea, you see Russia, Pakistan, India, China, all these superpower, their supremacy is recognized by launching or by having this nuclear weaponry among other stuffs, among the economic computation, among their political dynamism. All this stuff is counted together and their supremacy is recognized that way. What would you like to urge to African nations in terms of developing nuclear weapons?
Okay, well, there are certain organizations in the world that are very influential, such as the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. There's the World Nuclear Association based in London as well. The IAEA is based in Vienna. And they are very powerful. They're very powerful in the sense it's like belonging to a club. And nuclear is a brotherhood, a worldwide brotherhood. When you get into nuclear one way or another, what you want to do is to collaborate with the International Atomic Energy Agency. I like to say it's something like belonging to the golf club. If you go to the golf club tells you there's rules of what shoes you can and can't wear. There's rules about clothing in the evening inside the clubhouse and this type of thing. There's no way the golf club can tell you what you have to wear. If you don't do what they say, they throw you out of the club. It's that simple, okay? And if you get thrown out of the club, the other people in the club don't want to talk to you. And that's how it works in nuclear. You go to the International Atomic Energy Agency and say, I want to join the brotherhood. And they say, welcome. And I say, if you want to join the brotherhood, these are the rules. And you obey the rules. I keep referring to the airline, same thing. A pilot can quite easily do something really stupid when he's flying an airplane. But his consciousness of what his friends are going to tell him when he gets back to the tea room if he did something, the other pilots are going to say, well, you're out of your mind what you did, you know. And it's the same with nuclear. If you are part of the International Atomic Energy Agency, you sign up to the rules and you agree to obey the rules. And the rules say you don't move nuclear fuel this way. You don't move nuclear waste that way. And you listen, and countries collaborate with each other. And that is how you ensure that you do not move towards something like nuclear weapons, for example. You can easily check that. They have countries check each other. The International Atomic Energy Agency can send inspectors. You welcome the inspectors. South Africa is considered to be a particularly good member of the International Atomic Energy Agency. In fact, the Director General of the IAEA told me a couple of years ago, he said, South Africa is so good. He said, if everybody in the world did as well as you, I wouldn't have any worries in my job. And when we decided to do away with nuclear weapons and decided to join the club and do it properly, ever since then, we've done it properly. We never step out of line. And that is the type of thing you need to do. To say we're going to be responsible members of the international nuclear fraternity, and then everybody's friends and everybody helps out. If something goes wrong, like happened in Fukushima, all the other nuclear countries were ready to go there immediately to help out. And that is the type of thing that happens. And I emphasize it's a brotherhood like this. And so I see that Africa can really show the rest of the world how to network reactors together and how to trade. There's already various organizations that help out with training of people in all sorts of nuclear fields and so on. So I think that it's perfectly easy to do if you decide you want to do it properly and to be a member of the club, so to speak.
Dr. Kelvin Kemm, a very reputable African nuclear physicist from South Africa, Pretoria. Thank you for your precious time, and thank you for your scholarly analysis and scholarly insight about nuclear-related science and nuclear physics, this nuclear energy, nuclear weapons. And thank you very much on behalf of this media house. Have a good one. Bye-bye. See you next time with another agenda related to this nuclear physics. Hope you will be my permanent scholar on the area of nuclear energy.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, and I would love to be able to visit Ethiopia one of these days. This has been a beautiful discussion, and thank you so much for the kindness of inviting me and having this pleasant chat.
Anytime. Thank you very much. Dear viewers, thank you for joining us once again. You have been watching Future Africa show on OBN Horn of Africa. I hope you had a wonderful insight about nuclear physics and nuclear science that I had with Dr. Kelvin Kemm from South Africa, Pretoria. Have a good one. Bye-bye. See you next time with another edition.